So then we come to my email dated the 27th of March 2023 regarding the WHO Pandemic Treaty. Dear Peter, I wrote to you last year about my concerns regarding the WHO amendments to the 2005 International Health Regulations, IHR, and the creation of a new treaty previously referred to as the Pandemic Treaty, now referred to as CA+ Treaty, and the ramifications of both on the people of the UK. I did not receive an acceptable response from you. During the elapsed time, the WHO has continued developing the above two international legal instruments with the aim of increasing its own global authority in managing health emergencies, including pandemics. The two instruments work in synergy. 1. The IHR amendments lays out new and specific powers and processes desired by the WHO and its sponsors during health emergencies, and extending the context within which such powers can be used. And number 2, the treaty provides the terms for the administration, financing and governance of the powers and processes underpinning the enlarged IHR. Then there's an internet link. I can shove that in the description again. Both of these international legal instruments intended to have force under international law are in draft, which is critical because it means the UK government still has the opportunity to reject them, and it is imperative you reject them. As currently drafted, these proposed instruments fundamentally and detrimentally change the relationship between the WHO, its member states and consequently the people of the UK by taking us irrevocably closer to a technocratic biosecurity state. Not only must the two legal instruments be considered together, but also in the wider context of the globalist pandemic preparedness agenda, which I will consider briefly below. Since the start of the pandemic, the corporate media has been keen to tell us that pandemics are increasing in frequency, that they put an increased burden on health, and that increased contact between humans and wildlife makes zoonotic diseases more likely, and thus pandemics more likely. These claims are false. Consideration of the most recent pandemics shows they are in fact rare, occurring around once in a generation. The 1918-19 Spanish flu estimated between 20 and 50 million people died, although most of those deaths were actually from bacterial pneumonia due to mask wearing. That's in brackets. The 1957-58 influenza killed 1.1 million people, and the 1968-69 influenza killed 1 million. Since the start of the 1900s, pandemics have killed less people than other major diseases, such as cancer, which the WHO states killed nearly 10 million in 2020 globally. Tuberculosis kills 1.6 million every year, and malaria kills 500,000 children annually. If you are able to contradict this, please share the supporting data. The difference between the 2020 pandemic and the previous ones was that the response from the UK government and governments around the world. I'll reread that. The difference between the 2020 pandemic and previous ones was the response from the UK government and governments around the world. The restrictive, aggressive and disproportionate policies adopted had never been used before and actually contradicted the government's own pandemic preparedness plans. The harms caused by the draconian policies are now no longer disputed. Delayed diagnosis of medical conditions, suspension of treatment, interruption to education, isolation, fear, division within families, mental health issues, societal division, economic harm and increased poverty, causing more deaths than were caused by SARS-CoV-2. frequency of pandemics and harms caused by SARS-CoV-2 as justifications for the IHR and treaty simply do not stand up to scrutiny, yet the WHO continues to pursue with great focus a system that will ensure a repeat of such damaging responses on an ongoing basis. It should be of great concern that the funding of the WHO has fundamentally changed, with a material proportion of the funding now coming from the private and corporate sector as opposed to the individual countries as in the past. Those private and corporate funders are now able to provide funds on a specified, also known as directed, basis, which means they can direct how and where the funds are used. Prior to this, the countries funded the core, but leaving the spending to the discretion of the WHO. This change in funding has resulted in a shift from focusing on where in the world disease burden is the greatest to a focus on comorbidities, in particular vaccines. It should not be difficult to see how this can be used to generate profits for those private and corporate specified donors, and how this in turn will be detrimental for the people. Public-private partnerships such as the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation, Gavi, whose mission is to increase access to immunisation in poor countries, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI, whose mission is to accelerate the development of vaccines. All about the vaccines. Focus on the priorities of the private interests represented on their boards, yet both will be involved in the global response envisioned by the WHO. There is clear conflict of interest. In addition, UN agencies such as UNICEF, which is heavily focused on mass vaccination, and the World Bank will also be involved. The World Bank, through the Financial Intermediary Fund, FIF, provides financial support in relation to pandemic preparedness, with the WHO as technical partner, by funding the development of a surveillance, identification and response network as envisioned in the IHR and the treaty. And there's a link to World Bank. As a consequence of the aforementioned global partnerships, the IHR and the treaty will ensure more funding for the WHO than ever before in order to prepare and respond to possible future emergencies, thereby creating an international bureaucracy of vast proportions. This international bureaucracy will report to the WHO, and the WHO, through funding and political influence, will answer to private individuals and corporations. There will be an inevitable shift from the previous focus of the WHO on disease to a focus on outbreaks of new pathogens and anything else that the Director General can use to declare an emergency. There is no doubt that at the centre of this change will be the development of ever more vaccines. As a UN agency, the WHO is not subject to nation-state oversight and accountability. It should be easy to appreciate how, with a loosely defined definition of pandemic, a vast bureaucracy, including institutional employees on lucrative salaries, dependent on pandemics to justify its own existence, vested and conflicted interests of corporations, wealthy individuals and entities such as Gavi, CEPI and UNICEF, the WHO could be motivated to declare an ever-increasing number of pandemics and emergencies moving forward, a self-perpetuating pandemic industry and a constant requirement for funding. This will result in repeated restrictions on the lives of all of the people, all the while accruing profits for the vested interests via pharmaceuticals and restrictive mandates. It is in this context of an international pandemic bureaucracy and industry that the IHR and the treaty should be considered. The IHR draft amendments. Bullet points. Expand the definition of pandemic and health emergencies, including the introduction of the word potential for harm rather than actual harm, and the definition of health products is expanded to include any commodity or process that may impact on the responsibility or improve the quality of life. Next bullet point. Change the recommendation of the IHR from non-binding to mandatory instructions that the Member States undertake to follow and implement. Next. Solidify the Director General's ability to independently declare emergencies. Next. Establish an extensive surveillance process in all Member States which the WHO will verify regularly hell of a word, isn't it? Regularly through a country review mechanism. Enable the WHO to share country data without consent. Give the WHO control over certain country resources, including requirements for financial contributions and provision of intellectual property within the expanded definition of health products. Ensure country support for promotion of censorship activities by the WHO to prevent alternative dissenting approaches and concerns from being freely disseminated. And change existing IHR provisions affecting individuals from non-binding to binding, including border closures, travel restrictions, confinement, read quarantine, medical examinations and medication, to include requirements for injections with vaccines or other pharmaceuticals. And then there's a link again, WHO link. The treaty establishes an international supply network overseen by the WHO, funds the structures, processes of the IHR by requiring at least 5% of national health budgets to be devoted to health emergencies. The treaty sets up a governing body under the WHO guidelines to oversee the entire process and expands scope by emphasising the One Health agenda, a recognition that a very extensive range of aspects of life and the biosphere can impact health and therefore have the potential to spread harm across borders as an international health emergency. The World Health Assembly, WHA, the governing body of the WHO, requires a simple majority of the member states, which is 97 of the 194 member states. Notice it was 193 last year, it's 194 on this one. So that's just adding. Which is 97 of the 194 member states to pass the draft IHR amendments. If the amendments are passed, each country will have 6 months to opt out, reduced from 18 months by the WHA in 2022. If a country does not opt out during that time frame, it will be considered that they have accepted the amendment by virtue of being an existing signatory to the IHR. I'll just add that silence is consent, actually. The treaty requires a 2/3 majority by member states in order to be adopted. As you will no doubt be aware, both instruments are due to be presented to the WHA on the 24th of May 2023. The IHR amendments and the treaty are attempting to put into place a formal, legally binding framework that will ratify all that was wrong with the damaging COVID-19 response. The WHO is no longer about health, rather commercial interests, profit, power and control. If allowed to pass, national sovereignty will be lost. The people of the UK will lose their individual sovereignty, basic human rights and wealth. Poverty will increase for the people as the wealth is consolidated in the few. Yet the vast majority of British citizens have never heard of either of these instruments and thus have no idea of the implications on their lives. The IHR amendments, the new treaty, the meetings, the vote are all taking place without the knowledge of the people. The decision regarding the health of the people of the UK must remain the purview of the elected national government that is accountable to the people. That is what people assume and expect. A few questions to which I would welcome your response. 1. Do you believe that an industry dependent on pandemics and emergencies to justify its own existence can be trusted to be neutral in determining the existence of a pandemic or an emergency? If yes, please explain how this is guaranteed. 2. Do you believe that those who stand to gain financially from future pandemics and emergencies can be trusted not to wield their financial and political power to force the declaration of repeated pandemics and emergencies on spurious grounds? If yes, please explain how their position would not cause a clear conflict of interest. 3. Can you assure me that the government will not agree to anything that amounts to an outsourcing of future health emergencies from national government to an unelected, unaccountable WHO? If yes, please advise how this can be guaranteed. 4. Can you assure me that entities such as the IMF and the World Bank will not exert pressure on countries who choose not to ratify the instruments? Low-income countries could be especially exposed to financial pressure, restrictions or even sanctions from such entities. If yes, please confirm how this can be guaranteed. Number 5. Do you agree that the government should focus on improving health and investing in measures to strengthen natural immune systems by ensuring access to high quality food supplies, clean water, participation in sports and outdoor recreational activities? Furthermore, for improvements to psychological and social well-being, do you believe there should be government focus on fair pay and promotion of self-determination and freedom for the citizens it represents? 6. Do you believe mainstream media should be covering and debating the two international instruments? And as the proposed instruments impact every British citizen and removes UK autonomy as set out above, can you suggest why there is silence from the media on the topic? 7. Do you believe that Article 19 of the WHO Constitution is at the root of the problem we are currently facing? I have copied the text below for your convenience. If yes, what do you intend to do about it? If no, why not? In quotes, the Health Assembly shall have authority to adopt conventions or agreements with respect to any matter within the competence of the organisation. A 2/3 vote of the Health Assembly shall be required for the adoption of such conventions or agreements, which shall come into force for each member when accepted by it in accordance with its constitutional processes. End quotes. Number 8. Do you agree that any pandemic or emergency measures must respect fundamental human rights principles established over decades, and that such rights are absolute? If not, why not? 9. Do you agree that health policy, including emergency responses, should be embedded within national jurisdictions, and that the national agencies should be specifically prohibited from following external dictates from unelected and unaccountable entities? If not, why not? As is evidenced by the COVID-19 response, such instruments will have a profoundly detrimental impact on the lives of the people of the UK. In bold, I therefore call for you to reject the amendments to the IHR and the new treaty and ensure that the government does the same at the WHA in May this year. The government's response to COVID-19 exposed an ethical crisis in public health. The IHR and treaty will serve only to intensify that. Those who profited from the response to COVID-19 plan to do so again and again and again, they must be stopped. We must maintain the independence of the nation and the human rights of the people. In bold, one health, one world, one government must be rejected. I shall leave you with this quote from Edmund Burke. The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. I look forward to receiving your response. Best regards, me and my address and whatever. Then there's a link at the bottom again. Now here is the letter from our MP Peter Gibson, dated at the House of Commons, London, SW1A0AA. Case reference Papa Echo 29016, dated Tuesday the 28th of March 2023. Dear Andrew, thank you for your email about a potential new international treaty for pandemic preparedness. The COVID pandemic has been one of the greatest challenges to the established international order since the Second World War. A global threat that has required global solutions born out of global cooperation. I pay tribute to the people and nations across the world in confronting such a threat. International collaboration was immensely heartening to witness in the darkest of times. As in the late 1940s, where, to avert a repeat of the cataclysm of total war, world leaders united to establish the multilateral system we have today. I think it is reasonably fair to argue that a similar effort is required on the part of world leaders to strengthen preparedness for potential future pandemics. As such, I welcome the suggestion of the former Prime Minister, writing with other world leaders in 2021, that the international community should commit to producing a new international treaty for pandemic preparedness and response. I understand that such a treaty would aim to foster greatly enhanced cooperation in order to better protect the UK from the health, social and economic impacts of pandemics. Discussions are ongoing at the WHO to this end. The UK government wants to reach an agreement on its priority areas such as improving transparency, timely data sharing and supporting equitable access to vaccines and treatments. I appreciate your concerns about this, however, the government will not support any treaty which compromises the UK's sovereignty. There is nothing in the proposed treaty that would impact our ability to take decisions about national lockdowns or associated measures at the national level. I would certainly not support one which gave the WHO powers to make such decisions, which are rightly the preserve of national governments. Once adopted, international treaties only become binding in the UK when ratified by Parliament in accordance with our constitutional process. No international treaty can by itself change UK law. If changes to the law are necessary, then a treaty could not be ratified until domestic legislation, agreed upon by Parliament, was put in place. As I have said, I will not support any treaty that is not in our interest or which comprises the UK's sovereignty. Usual ending. Once again, thank you for taking time to contact me, and if I could ever be of further assistance to you, please do not hesitate to contact me again. If you would like to keep up to date with my activities as a Member of Parliament, then please subscribe to my Darlington Matters newsletter using this link, which I will not. I have looked actually, and some things is doing a good job, but is doing a bad job. So, it's not working in the interests of the people. And either way, that's his letter, dated the 28th of March 2023. Regarding the WHO Pandemic Treaty, I recently came across a video featuring MEPs Dr. Robert Malone and Brian Bridle, is it? It was a press conference after the International COVID Summit 3. Now, if you go to Christian Ter's, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, YouTube channel, you can see which I'm referring to. It's the last three. The MPs here could do with actually watching these. It's a bit too much for me. I've watched the summary, which was 5 days ago, but Christian has now posted the International COVID Summit 3 part 1 and part 2. But if you've got time, part 1 is 3 hours 26 minutes and 49 seconds, and part 2 is 4 hours 30 minutes and 37 seconds. Now I think all our MPs should watch that, or at least watch the summary before they see the full summit, which is quite an eye-opener. I do have to write back to Peter Gibson. It's obvious that there's no intention of refusing anything on that. It's same with the previous letters that are read out regarding Andrew Bridgen. This guy has no intention of listening to what anybody says. He's making some changes around Darlaw, you know, like, is in the background sort of pushing things. It's mainly PR stunts, but changing stuff like setting up government businesses and offices. But he's not doing anything for the people he's injured by his decisions on the WHO and the they're not vaccines, the injuries that Andrew Bridgen was referring to with the Office of National Statistic Data, which obviously they're not fit for purpose. If nobody wants to listen to them, obviously that's an office that should be shut down and save taxpayers a fortune. There's quite a few of them. Maybe Parliament as well, just leave the 2 MPs that are doing something, Andrew Bridgen and Sir Christopher Chope. Either way, those are the WHO emails and letters. On my part, make of them what you will. Thanks for listening, guys, and I will catch you all soon. All the best.